All right, what's up, everybody? Mark with Cardivox Academy here, and today we're doing something kind of fun. Today we're venturing. We've got dear old Matt McGachy from Cryptopsy here. Matt, how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm great. I just got back from a European tour. We did 34 shows across the UK, Scotland, mainland Europe with Decapitated, Warbringer, Incarnation. It was a blast. I just got home. I'm restructuring my house because I have two young children that are little tornadoes that tore it apart while I was gone.
Oh yeah.
I'm cooking. I'm getting back into the sedentary life of a touring musician.
Oh, and I'm sure that's a wild transition. I'm interested. You say I'm cooking. Are you a big fan of cooking? Because that's outside of like vocals and video games. Cooking is one of
Oh
my
yeah.
like biggest
Oh, I love
passions.
cooking.
Yo.
I moved out with my wife. We've been together forever,
Uh-huh.
over 20 years. So in 2009, I left my parents' house as a 24-year-old, I believe. That math adds up, maybe. And we moved to Montreal, and my wife worked super late. So my mom used to always cook for me, and then I ended up in the situation where I couldn't wait for my wife to come home at 9 p.m. and cook me supper. So out of survival instincts, I had to start cooking on my own. So it's been, a bunch of years that I've been messing around with stuff. We became vegan in 2017, so that
Uh-huh.
changed up my whole recipe
Sure.
book list. But I do love cooking, and it's something that I actively like to do. We have like an open concept in the house, so I can like watch the kids, hang out with the kids, cook, listen to music. It's something that I love to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. My cooking story is similar. We weren't married at the time, we were just dating. My wife went to grad school to get her master's
Hmm.
in social work. And I didn't know how to make scrambled eggs. And she went to grad school, money was tighter, and so we weren't going out to eat as much. She didn't have time to cook, so I was like, "Okay, gonna figure this out."
That's what
And
you do. It's a
that's what
trial and error. Yeah.
and it turned out I loved it. It turned out I was like, yo, this is really fun. And then you get to the point where what you make at home is better.
That's it.
Or
It drives me crazy.
yeah,
As a vegan too, I'll go to like a vegan restaurant and I'll be like, why is this so expensive? I can make this for so much. There's like certain things that I can't get across. Certain like Satans that I get at like vegan places are just so goddamn good. And I haven't mastered Satan. I've mastered Satan, the Dark Lord, but not Satan,
I
the
know what you're
vital
talking
wheat
about.
gluten.
Yeah, I
Um,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
that's something that I'm aspiring to put into my arsenal of vegan cooking is decent homemade Satan.
Well, it's I've never tried that myself. I'm familiar with. I grew up in an environment where the vast majority of people were vegan.
Oh yeah.
Most people were vegan, most people were vegetarian. So it was weird. This is the last thing I'll say about food. I guess we should talk
It's
about
okay.
vocals, but I love food.
You got to
Um,
fuel the instrument.
exactly. You do. I got to college, big university, and I found it weird that there were people who, and again, I'm not vegan or vegetarian, but I found it weird when people were like, "Where's the meat on the plate?" And I'd be like, "What do you mean? Where?" Clearly not present. What kind of question is that? And I learned like, oh, I came from a very small, very kind of sequestered environment where like university was like this experience with it. So when people were like, "There's no meat and potatoes," I was like,
Do I
"Correct."
do I need to have
Yeah,
that?
is it required? But I'm actually really excited to have you on the channel because like we were talking about before we hit record, most of my audience is like I would say lately very like into the more I don't know what the word is, stylized perhaps. That's not the right word, but the current wave of deathcore vocalists, which I find immensely impressive. But sometimes when talking with my audience directly, I want to be like, there's a bigger world, and so
Of extreme vocals, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
exactly, and so much of it is impressive, and there's so much to learn, right? And so I'm excited to talk about your vocal style because it is quite different, at least to my ear, than a lot
Good.
of the
Thank
stuff
you.
that.
Tell everyone that keeps saying that I'm a deathcore vocalist, please, because I'm not.
Okay, so I'm gonna have a moment of truth with you. Before I have no matter, because obviously I'm familiar with Cryptopsy, obviously I'm familiar with you, but I always do a little bit of research beforehand. The night before, I always just brush up. And I saw somebody say, this was an old Reddit post from a couple years ago. They were like deathcore vocalists, and I was like, what? I was like, wait, hold on. Wait. So I was surprised to find that, because to me, you have much more of a like death metal, sometimes with the tonality in your screams, thrashy even, so at times scream than a deathcore scream. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting conversation, and especially because you said you played this song Until There's Nothing Left every night on this tour.
That's right. For the first time, we had actually never played the song together before
Really?
the tour, which is something that happens, right? When you're in like a band that tours as much as we do, you don't practice every week anymore, which is what you should practice every week. Everyone, don't be like us.
Yeah.
Be more focused and practice every week, and don't just cram it before the tour, and stay in vocal shape. But we didn't have time. I had like a huge life change right before the tour that took over a lot of my mental space, and I just never made it to the jam room before the tour. So I was walking around London in Camden Town, just listening to the song over and over again. And the first show was an Incineration Fest at the Electric Ballroom, sold out. It was massive. And I was deeply nervous as to have never had actually sang this song, even from A to Z, except for a few days before while I was cleaning my bathroom. Because I'm an ultra multitasker.
Sure.
It's my favorite thing to do. I jam in my house and I clean my house while doing the set, which I also think is a very interesting way of learning and getting your mind ready for that muscle memory activation of remembering how to deliver certain patterns or certain lines and certain lyrical patterns, because you're actively busy doing something else. So you're forcing your brain to go and rely on muscle memory. So it's something that I've been doing for the past year or so, is that I clean my house while I jam before a tour.
Well, I am so glad to hear you saying this, because I talk to my students all the time about how oftentimes you're going to have to fit practice into your daily life, because who has like 45 minutes of uninterrupted time a day? No.
Exactly.
So it's
the
good.
Longest part of going to band practice is waiting for everyone else to be ready as the vocalist.
Yeah, because we're doing all the work of sitting there calmly while everybody's setting up the drum set,
and you commute there. You got to wait for them to show up. It's nice to see your bandmates.
Yeah,
but, if you want to just practice and get your voice in shape, you can do it at your house.
Yeah,
it's not as loud as you think it is.
Well, let's go ahead and let's get into it. I also just realized I need to share my screen. So YouTube audience, you're going to notice a hard cut because I got to share my screen. I'm sure you want to actually hear the song too. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click share. I'm going to click screen 2, share sound. And then I got to reposition this, but that's fine. It's quite easy to do. Bring back OBS. All right. Now you should be able to see that. Yeah,
I can. Yes.
Okay. Let me make sure you can hear it.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. And we're back. Now, I was a good boy and I didn't listen to this song ahead of time. So this is
cool.
Yeah, that's
interesting. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, that's when I first started doing reaction videos, I didn't know that it was first time reaction. So in my first like 10 videos, people would be like, "You've totally heard this before." And I'd be like, "Yeah." Oh, you're not supposed to.
I misunderstood how this works.
Although these days, like, there are bands where I'm going to listen to it beforehand because I'm excited. And anybody who doesn't like it can deal with it.
I try not to listen to singles, but I did listen to the new Between the Buried and Me just before this.
Oh, okay. Well, see, I didn't even know that was out. So that's something I got to do. But let's check it out. Let's do Cryptopsy Until There's Nothing Left. Here we go. And I'm just going to pause randomly when I find it interesting.
Sure. Go for it.
Nice.
Fire the
Okay, that's actually a perfect place to stop. So I think one of the main things that I hear that I'm interested to ask you about is vocal placement and the way that it relates to the feeling of pressure within your neck, right? Now,
Hmm.
because one thing that I notice, right, is that you tend to carry a tonality underneath your screams. I tend to, like, if I was to sit down at a piano, I could find maybe pretty close to the
Hmm.
pitch that's underneath. Now, that's something that most of my students, they're like, if they're watching this, they're gonna be like, wait, I thought you weren't supposed to do that. And you're totally allowed to. I generally teach students to start from a place of not doing that so they don't have to rely on the vocal cords themselves, but it can create a really cool tone that you can put in that can play nicely with certain melodies that are being played. But one thing I'm finding, and I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. You joined Cryptopsy in 2007,
7.
same year I graduated high school. That's how I should have remembered it. But so I'm sure this is something that's partially the result of experience over a large period of time. But when you're switching from these like low, like death metal growls to these big, like strong, really well-rounded, not thinned out highs, I'm not hearing what I call like the anime voice or the Naruto voice, where it's like on the actual vocal folds. I don't hear that. It
No, no,
sounds
no.
very open and relaxed.
It
So
is. Yeah.
when you're doing these different screams, and this question's kind of broad, kind of intentionally, because I want to see where you go with it. But what is the difference in just overall sensation of these mid to low roars, and then these more high, uh, uh, almost shouted, but really nicely gritified screams? What's the difference in sensation on those?
Perfect. Yeah, yeah. So my lows are like something that comes to me so naturally that when I first joined Cryptopsy, I threw away. And for the first multiple records of Cryptopsy, I was using this very forced tunnel throat, maybe fry scream, who knows? I was pushing so hard,
Mm,
trying to sound as brutal as I could. Whereas the technique I'm using on this here is something that I was using way before Cryptopsy, just this very natural sort of open sigh type guttural with the flesh vibrating. And
mhm.
I brought it back on Tome 2. I happened to just step back into the vocal booth and did like a just one of those open screams, a false chord scream.
Yeah.
And my producer, guitarist Christian Donaldson was like, "What is that? Why don't you do that? Why aren't you using that voice?" So we used a little bit of that voice on Tome 2. And then as Gamora Burns, like between those two cycles was a big chunk in the pandemic. And me and Donaldson had decided that all future Cryptopsy was just going to have that voice now.
Whoa.
So what it feels like to me is I'm incredibly relaxed. There
Excellent.
is absolutely nothing going on here. It's all air and skin vibrating is
Hmm.
really what I imagine and what I see. And I had the pleasure of going to hang out with Enrico from Hideous Divinity, who's
Nice.
a ear, nose, and
Excellent.
throat doctor, and he put the
Yeah.
camera down my throat, and I performed a full track, and it's been the most reassuring thing vocally for me to have
Hmm.
him say, I was mid-tour, so I'd been using my voice every night intensely as a
Sure.
headliner, and he was like, "You're perfect. There's no damage. There's nothing." And it's just like the
Yeah,
most
dude.
like relieving thing. So, and then on stage that night, after having seen like my little vocal anus open and close and doing its thing, I could imagine it do it while I was performing. And
Mm,
that has been eye-opening as well too. So when I'm performing the low guttural stuff, it's really there's nothing going on here. It's all diaphragm, air, flesh vibrate. I feel my flesh vibrating inside
yes.
is where that
Yeah.
comes from. And then when I flip up to a high, I switch techniques and go back to a fry technique, I believe. And I shoot the air up much higher into my soft palate. And I have to, for that technique, I need to hear myself better. If luckily
Mm,
we're on in-ear monitors when we're
of
live,
course.
so it's super easy. And I really like it if I can hear the bounce back from the room when I do highs to get the reverb flap and everything. Um, That there's a little bit more pressure, but it's not anything that it's as if I'm just constricting the airway just a little bit
Mm,
to pitch it up higher.
yes.
And there's always a tonality because I was trained as a Broadway singer early on,
Oh, that I did
and
not
I
know.
do
Interesting.
tend to scream to the tone of the song, which my producer Chris, the guitarist, pushes me away from sometimes. He's like, "No, deeper." And he just wants that brutal death metal thing as opposed
Sure.
to being more of a sing-along thing.
Sure. Yeah, that's always an interesting toss up because like, one thing that I don't one thing that you run into with harsh vocals is that, and this is just, well, I think it's true, but the less tone you have, the more difficult it can be to sound unique, I think sometimes
Mm-hmm.
when you just have texture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's coming from somebody who I do not entirely, but a lot of primarily just texture screams, right? You have to rely on other things. So that's, and you don't, I feel like these days you don't hear as many vocalists. Now, the music that I listen to is almost entirely dictated by my job. Very rarely do I say, I want to listen to this record. So maybe I'm out of touch here. But I feel like you don't hear as many people screaming like in key with the song, unless it's somebody doing like,
The
like
Randy,
chest.
like when Randy brought out
Yes.
his that's how old I am. His new voice 20
Y-
years ago
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or like,
on
your
Sacrament, like
yeah, or your Chester Benningtons,
yeah,
like
yeah.
those like it's still metal, but it's very like rock influenced.
Hmm.
This on the darker side, I think you hear less of it. So I really like it. Although, I'm not gonna say don't listen to your guitarist. I'm not gonna do that. But I like it. I really like what I'm hearing. Let's go ahead and let's keep listening to a little bit more. I've got a couple other questions, but there's a whole song to get through, and I'm excited to hear where it goes. So let's keep going. Here we go. It's interesting.
I'll see. I just realized I've been making a mistake the past 34 days, but
It's not a mistake. It's a live variation. All
no,
right.
but it's better that way. I'm gonna go back and do it that way after.
Well, that's we played our first show of 8 years
Mm,
in October. We played in Germany for a festival, and I
nice.
straight up rewrote parts because I was like, I'm not
Well,
going for
after
it.
8 years, you got time to you evolve as a vocalist all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So no, it's a live variation. It's a live variation. But one thing that I'm finding interesting about your voice, and it's you said when I do these high screams, it's a fry, I think. And fry is such an interesting term because so many people use it differently and so many people use it to mean different things. I noticed that when you're holding the tone of your scream, like you hold out a high, it's very TV staticky. Then when you articulate, it gets a little bit of like uh, 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 just a touch of that bubbly sound that we often associate with false chord, although oftentimes it's coming from like the epiglottis, like flopping around and things.
Mm.
Do
Maybe
you
that's what it
notice,
is. That makes sense actually. Yeah.
you know, I'm just guessing based on what I hear. I'm not like homeboy with the scope. I remember, by the way, that the one of the first things I ever saw with Enrico Di Lorenzo years ago was him scoping himself, and
Yeah.
it
He's amazing. Yeah.
blew my
Yeah.
mind. I loved
Yeah.
that video. Um,
And there's not when we track vocals, I feel like everything's only one layer. There might be some like
yeah,
backup stuff that come up stereo, but it's only to accentuate stuff. For the past many years, me and Chris, we've only been doing one layer of vocals.
well, and so okay, that's the second question I was going to ask you. So let's actually start with that question. I learned how to do all this stuff. I didn't know what the heck I was doing at first. I didn't know anything about music production. My buddy was just like, "Hey, do you want to be the vocalist in our band?" And I was like, "I don't know how to do vocals, but yes." I was like, "I'll figure it out."
Look at you now.
I just had to figure out what I was doing. And I come from this background of everybody always said, double track everything, double track everything, double track everything.
It was back in the day. It was, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm finding now that I'm starting to hear and pick out, oftentimes enjoying vocals more when they're single tracked, because I feel like a lot of the grit and gurgle and rough around the edges, not rough around the edges, but raw.
Away.
Yeah. And I'm hearing a lot of that with your voice here. So I was going to ask if that's a conscious choice, but clearly it is.
It totally is. It totally is. Yeah.
And I think it lends to your sound quite well. I had another question about that, but I totally. Well, I'll do this. Do you have any thoughts on that? Since I forgot what I was gonna say.
when you first push play was one of those moments when Chris was like, "Scream deeper."
Yeah.
And it really came in at like, from the part before to the part right after, the register drops and falls out of maybe the key of the song. I'm not the most musical person.
Oh, it's all good. Now, let me ask you about that. That's a really interesting question. So I've noticed that there are different, to no surprise, different techniques with lower vocals, right? And not necessarily false chord and fry, but different techniques as to how to achieve those lows. So when you're going for these lows, are you doing it primarily with like this laryngeal drop? Are you doing it more by like shifting forward and opening the mouth? Or are you just kind of like, I don't know, man, I'm just going low and seeing what happens? Like, what's your approach?
I open, if I'm my standard Matt low, so we could just know, is just this very relaxed open thing. If I want to go a little bit lower, I'll focus more on like an sound.
Okay.
It's all about vowels, right? When you're screaming, you have to hit the vowels to really accentuate what you're saying all the time. So I find myself really scream, and I hold my mic here when I scream live too, which is a bad habit from the podcast, but I think that it's actually come across really well for my articulation live. So it's like really the standard me is just this really relaxed, open thing that just I can do it all the time. Like no matter, I don't have to warm up, I don't do anything, and the voice is ready. To go lower, I have to, I guess maybe I lean forward a little bit more and focus more on an sound. So I guess my jaw goes out a little bit more forward while still remaining completely relaxed. I spend my shows telling myself, this is so easy. And that works.
Ah, nice. Yeah, dude.
Even when it's not. But most of the time it is, because I've convinced myself that it is. Just like I love flying. I tell myself that all the time when I'm on tour.
Oh, I love this is the best.
Yeah.
You know, that's a very valuable insight as well, because I think, you know, our voice, our vocal anatomy is so tied into like our emotional state. And I have found, you know, if
stress tightens you up.
Exactly. If I go into a studio setting and I'm like daunted by the song because I've written something, as I always do, I've written something that's a little too challenging for me, then I'm going to mess it up. But if I say like, you know, if I say like, you might make, maybe I don't like one take Nancy the thing, but I get it eventually, right? So, so it sounds like it sounds like your technique is similar to, I say mine. It's not mine. A lot of people do it, where you focus mostly on achieving the low in the shape of the lips, the jaw.
I have a really big head, so I don't know if that works. My neck is really big because I've been headbanging for the past 6 weeks, but
there you go.
That might be a part of it too.
I find putting on like, if I'm staying in false chord, if I'm not going to like a more deep, like arytenoidal epiglottal type of thing, I find that like sometimes I'll straight up scream in like a Sylvester Stallone voice. You know what I mean? I'll do like a, hey, you know, hey, and it's super helpful. But yeah, and we'll keep going because I'm sure I'm going to hear that rattle in your high screams. I'm really interested to dig into those more. But let's keep going. Yeah. When one suffers more than the other, as I live within your mind, all the darkness has no content within my life. All right, I know I'm pausing
There's a new
pretty.
voice on this record, which when your eyebrows went up it's like this, it's like a low high, which
Yeah.
I've added to my arsenal, and that's
Hmm.
new from this studio session, and
Mm.
it's was like a happy accident that just sort of came out of me that we
Nice.
were like, this is interesting, and we used it a lot on the record. It's like this new voice. It's probably the voice that not hurts, but bothers me the most, maybe.
Oh,
I think it's a
interesting.
little
Really?
bit, maybe slightly unhealthier vocally, maybe. I don't know. I did it on tour for 30, there was no problems in the long run, and I didn't feel anything, but I think I was cheating it on tour and using more of a false chord approach to it than I did in the studio, where I was really just letting the air flow up
Hmm.
to hit the higher register as opposed to flipping into the other technique. So maybe that's the reason why, but it's an interesting technique. It's interesting texture that has been added to my arsenal, and it's something that we'll probably keep exploring. And since I got away with it live and nobody remarked that it was any different than the record, then I think I can get away with it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. You can hear a definite shift in mouth shape, right? It
Hmm.
definitely goes from
Yeah, yeah, it's a much more like, yeah,
yeah, and
exactly,
that like the head
exactly,
up. You've got
exactly.
like
Yeah.
you mentioned that you were originally trained. You said like more like Broadway, more
Yeah, yeah,
like
I had the
singing.
singing teacher when I was really, luckily my aunt got me singing lessons when I was really just
Mm.
out of high school, or still in high school even, maybe. And she was like, "You got to protect your voice because you're such a good singer." And then I ended up in a death metal band. But the no, no,
Yeah.
she's still proud of me. But the singing coach wanted me to sing for Cirque du Soleil, which would have been something that I
Oh,
probably should have listened to, since I'm from Montreal, and Montreal Cirque du Soleil used to be based here, so there was a potential. But
yeah.
but that was her whole purpose. So all of my breathing and everything, the visualization while singing, to create certain sounds, all came from those lessons.
Well, the reason I ask, and that's interesting insight. Look, you could have been flying around on a trapeze and
Yeah, or just standing up
do
there touring the world, not having to load in.
um the reason I ask is because it's probably not the exact same thing, but one thing, like if you think less proper Broadway singing and you think bad Broadway impression,
Oh yeah.
right? If I hello my
Yeah.
baby, hello, I find that when I aim a false chord or sort of mishmashy scream with like that sort of twangy placement, but it's grit going through, it really like pulls it forward
Yeah.
and like out of the
Oh, that's
throat.
interesting. Yeah.
Do
Maybe
you
maybe
do?
that's maybe that's where it's coming from. I do spend my time, like, if I'm speaking in a loud place, I will go more into a register like this
Oh yeah,
to
yeah,
protect my throat, because the thing that will hurt my throat more than anything in a live setting is speaking loud at a venue.
yes, yes.
So I've
That.
I've I've gotten used to doing this, and I do it
Mhm.
subconsciously. Like, I just do it without even thinking about it now.
It's super helpful, and it especially, yeah, for talking over the music. And one thing I talked about Sylvester Stallone earlier. Another thing I'll do if I'm singing a little bit, maybe it's not like a full on high scream, but it's a brighter scream, is I'll scream like a very stereotypical, like New York, like nobody actually fucking
Yeah.
talks like this.
Mm.
All right, but I'll give it some of that, hey, what's going
Yeah.
on?
What's going on, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that really,
Yeah.
so it's interesting how
That's
the
so interesting how
techniques.
you go through with accents and personalities to, like, psychologically trigger your body to react the way you want it to. It's a different way of visualizing. I'm having a hard time with that word today.
Yeah,
All these things there's no, the voice is such a mysterious thing because you can't just put your finger on a fret. It's all about abstract thinking. And that's really
exactly.
interesting that you go through personalities or characters to
That's
hit certain things. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, and it's something that I have found is kind of common with people who started doing vocals like when I did, which so I started doing vocals. You were already in Cryptopsy when I like started trying to be a vocalist, and there was like I didn't know the term false quarter fry.
No, 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 no one did. Yeah, there was
Nobody
Melissa
did.
Cross, and there was no one
Yep.
else.
There was Melissa Cross and there was no one else, and my parents were not going to buy me that DVD.
My parents did buy me that DVD.
Oh, good job, mom and dad. And so that's and there was maybe you'd get a tutorial on MySpace sometime, but the tutorials back then were like, they were all, hey guys, this is how I do my fry scream. So I just open up my mouth and then I do it. And it's like, thanks, that's useless. So I think that a lot of us do it that way because
I think it's cool. I think it's, I might hypothetically adapt to it. I think it's very interesting.
Well, it's interesting to kind of reverse engineer them this way. But anyways, yeah, that was one of the main things I wanted to talk about, was that like higher, like that you opened up into. Yeah. Super cool. Let's keep going here. I'm going to try to let more of the song play, but you
I am
do
chatty.
Well, no, I was going to say, do me a favor, and for the next minute, don't do anything interesting, because then I won't pause. I won't be like, oh, let's talk about that. Oh, let's talk about that. Here we go. Okay. Oh, that bass sounds sick. Yeah, that open.
Once again, there,
yeah. So I want to ask you actually a little less about tone and actual technique, and I want to ask you a little bit more about like writing, because one thing I do with a lot of my students as they become more proficient in like one or two sounds, what we'll do is, I'll usually buy them an instrumental. There are a bunch of people who Dark Cabin Studios. They have like $20 for an instrumental. You don't have the rights to it, but you can practice to it. And we'll write together. And one thing that is incredibly challenging for them, twofold. Number one, just knowing what pattern, like what do you do over the music? And number two, a lot of my students, they think, because they have, at this point, they have one or two screams, one or two sounds. And I always try to tell them, you don't have to have a lot. But they think they can't make anything interesting. And I'm like, oh, we can. And you're introducing a lot of nuance. You're introducing a lot of like pattern changes and things. But I want to hear, like, what are some of the things you do to keep these low, like barking, powerful, driving, like false chord vocals? Exactly. Yeah. What are some of your approaches?
I'm so lucky that my guitarist and producer is a genius, and I'm basically his vocal puppet. I'll be 100% honest. I always track my ideas. I write all the lyrics, obviously. I track my version of the song and I bring it to him, and then we sit together and he tells me how bad I am. And then he rewrites everything for me. And we sit together and we go line by line, section by section, and construct interesting patterns, because he is a prolific producer. He's produced everyone from Despised Icon to Shadow of Intent, Ingested, so many bands, Beyond Creation, Cryptopsy, The Agonist. He's worked with Elisa back in the day when she was still in The Agonist.
Wow, yeah.
He's worked with everyone. So I trust him completely, and he's always tends to be right. It's always more interesting. And he really, really likes the last record. He would have me start like on an upbeat instead of a downbeat. And now he was like working more on coming in just a little bit late on the two, he was saying, I believe he said. Not musical. So basically I sit with him and I learn the patterns that he comes up with on the spot, because it is true that it could just be monotonous and boring, but he always makes it extremely musical. is it's the past two releases have been far more musically driven vocally, where the voice is a part of the song more so than just something that's plastered on top. We really worked on just creating little interesting accents. Um, and the patterns always change because he's like, there's moments where he's like, we can't do that again. We have to do something different. And then he has to sit
Yeah.
there and he rubs his beard and he gets up and he walks around the room and then he comes back with, he's like, you're missing three syllables. And then I have to write on the spot
Oh
to fulfill
yeah.
this new pattern, which is fine, because we have such a good working relationship. So I can't take any of the credit for it. It's all him. It's a painstaking endeavor.
Sure.
I go and live at his house when we track vocals, and we wake up in the morning early because we have kids, and go into the studio with cups of coffee. And we sit there, and he has the lyrics, and I sit with him, and I have my computer to edit everything that he's changing, and we go line by line to create something interesting. And he whisper tracks it, and then I retrack it after.
Dude, that sounds like a great time.
It's fun. And then we
That sounds
drink,
like
and then we drink at night and listen to what we do every day
yeah.
and change things, saying, "Oh, this is good, but maybe we should do a little bit more of that." Take notes, and then we fix it the next morning, and then keep going.
That sounds excellent. And you know, it is so true because it's you know, similarly to me, like I would not I would be a far worse vocalist if I didn't have my bandmates also chiming in. You know, we're lucky in that we, you know, in Kardashev, we have a very good relationship. No, there's none of us have a lot of ego, you know, and I used to, I did. I'm
Oh
not
yeah.
gonna, I,
I was
I
so demolished on my first record that I never had an ego.
I remember I had this experience where there was one album, I don't even remember which one it was, but I wasn't sitting by Nico writing note by note, and I had to admit myself, when I stepped back, the music got better.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, Mark, you need to learn your place. But it really is so valuable to have that second set of ears. It's so valuable to have that second set of ears because they're always going to find something that we can be doing better. And you know, one thing I think, you know, I'm noticing, again, this is my first time hearing the song, so you know, I obviously it would take 4 or 5 listens to really pick it apart. But one thing I'm noticing is that you have Barky
We
Barky
call
are
that we originally called that voice Chris Bark,
oh, okay. Well, there you go. Well, you have,
like a barky Chris Barnes.
but over, it's interesting, Barky accentuation over legato sections, which
Mm.
which I think is quite fascinating and fun to listen to because you're kind of hitting the best of both worlds in a couple ways. Because a lot of times false chord vocals, as you know, you run out of air really quick.
Hmm.
But because you have some connectivity from your vocal folds, right? We have some of that tone. You've got a little bit more airflow management, so you're able to hold things out. So you know you have this, like, you know, da 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 da, but you're able to go da 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 da. You kind of get the barkiness of the open false chord with the control of the tone underneath, and the moving back and forth between that I think is pretty cool too. And sometimes you have like the sound, like, speaking figuratively here, like coming from like underneath your chin, like this, like, but then other times
Mm.
you like over the top of the teeth,
Hmm.
and so the movement back and forth I think is another.
And it comes with like certain words, the way that I pronounce them or bite into them really dictate how that flows.
Bite into them is a good way to put it. I like that. I like
I
that quite
really bite
well.
into I really, really, it's a mental focus thing of shooting air and biting it as it comes out.
How much? That's a good question. That opens up a good question. How, obviously we're doing, like, this is metal, and it's a very raw, sludgy side of metal. And so, you know, oftentimes a criticism we get is they're like, well, we can't understand what you're saying. And it's like,
Hmm.
well,
I try
true.
really hard. We really try really hard to make it as comprehensible as possible.
Okay, good. Because that was going to be what I asked. What is your, like, how much do you value?
100% is very, very, very important for us in this modern age of cryptopsy that it's as understandable to an outsider as possible. With lyrics, obviously, it's super easy to understand,
Sure.
but it's a massive effort that we put into it to try to make it as understandable as possible. To a death
Yeah.
metal keen person, I feel like they'll be able to understand what I'm saying.
Uh
To someone that is not used to death metal, it probably just sounds like screaming. But
huh.
there's moments that my highs are a little bit better at understanding, maybe because there's more diction control in that
Sure. Yeah.
technique, maybe, and there's less air that needs to travel in order to get the tone, maybe.
So then let me ask you this. If you know, with this goal of keeping the vocals as comprehensible as possible, which is for a lot of people, myself included, more of a task in the mid and low range, what are some things you do to compensate for that? What are, you know, I feel like I hear some things that you're doing, but I don't want to lead the
How
witness, you
do
know?
I just try to really focus and bite into them as possibly as much as possible to really and create like a little bit more like spitty for certain
Okay.
things to let the phlegm and the I do spit a lot on stage. It's something that's been happening for the past few years, I guess with the new technique. I don't know, maybe you have more info about that than I do. Why do we spit more when we're doing false chords than other screams?
So my answer is I'm not entirely sure, but I did ask I saw an ENT, this is previous before the vocal study that I was a part of up at the University of Utah. And you know, I asked that question because for me, I get really spitty when I do a lot of my high vocals because
Okay.
my high
Maybe
vocals
it's my
are,
highs then, yeah. Yeah.
well, they're very different from yours. And so I said, like, why am I getting so spitty? You know, I get really spitty and foamy when I do my high vocals. And at first I was worried that that was like not a good thing. And essentially what the doctor told me is that you have saliva producing glands back here at the top of your throat and under your tongue. And he's like, when you do these things, that's all rattling like crazy.
Oh yeah.
And so
See, that
it's
makes sense. Yeah.
shaking him around and stimulating him. And I remember thinking like, I really should have thought of that, but I
Yeah,
didn't.
it makes
You
it
know,
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
when he says it, you're like, oh, but before that, I didn't know. Well, let's go ahead. We'll probably just finish it out here because I hate when I accidentally mess up a good outro. So
Okay.
I'm gonna let the rest of the song, because outros tend to be my favorite part of a song. That's like, outros are the best, whether or not it's like super quick, whether or not it's like super drawn out. So I'm gonna let it play out, and then we'll I'm sure have a little bit more to talk about. But let's go ahead and keep going. We got about almost exactly 1 minute left. Perfect. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Never go into the attic. Never go into the attic. Okay, perfect. So, oh, it's like outro credits. Is there anything else? I don't want to. Okay, cool. So, you know, here's a we kind of touched on this before the call or before I started recording, and I want to delve into it if I could. This will probably be some of the last questions I have for you, because I know you just got back. I know you want to probably relax and hang out with the family. I don't want to take too much of your time, but you know, I am interested. You know, vocals are so different now. Metal vocals are so different now. I feel like, you know, you go back and you listen to stuff from, and this is to be expected, but you listen to stuff from the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, and things have changed so much. And so, you know, I'm interested in just as somebody who's been doing metal vocals for longer than I have, you know, and you've been both participating in the landscape and viewing the landscape for so long, what are some of your just takes on how things have changed, certain sounds, you know, just kind of broadly with your experience, what do you think about what's going on vocally these
I think
days?
it's super exciting, the future of extreme vocals. I think that there's a number of things that I think about with extreme vocals and the future is. The first one is this. We're entering the age where we will be able to witness how long a human can do this.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a
I
good
think
point.
that's super interesting. So there's always like a finite thing. Like my drummer isn't, I consider him as an Olympic athlete, my drummer. What he
Uh-huh.
has to do is very intense. He's
Uh-huh.
50 years old. He's going to be 51 in a few weeks. How many more years can he perform at an Olympic athlete level before he can no
Sure.
longer participate in the Olympics. I'm wondering the same thing with extreme vocals. Is there going to come a time that George Fisher can no longer do what he does? I think he can do it forever.
I
That's
hope
my take on
I
it.
hope so. I hope so. You know.
I can totally, he's as good as he is today as he was when I toured with him 10 years ago, as he was 20 years before that.
Yeah.
He is one of the greats. So I think that's interesting. I think the study that you're part of is going to be something that's very interesting to see, that the longevity of a death metaler's voice
Mhm.
and how that holds up. It'd be really interesting if the study studied the same people over multiple years to see if there has been any damage with
Sure.
full-time touring that has been happening, like Travis from Cattle. If they keep following him, I think it'd be super interesting to watch that. The
Agreed.
other thing that's super interesting is the kids today, the younguns, because I'm so old, the new generation of extreme metal vocalists um, are doing things that nobody did back in the day
Mhm.
because they have all these tools, such as you, um, showcasing techniques, how to approach things in a healthy way without ever blowing out their voice. I have so many friends. I remember growing up in the metal scene that were like, "Oh, screaming, you're gonna hurt yourself. You can't do this," back in the early 2000s. And I had friends that were like, "I left the studio and I coughed up blood." These are things that has never happened to me.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm just built different, or my Broadway foundation protected me. So
Sure.
thank you, Auntie Judy. And I'm excited to see what all these young kids come up with, because look at what Will Ramos has done recently, just creating strange sounds, which is nothing necessarily new, just expanding upon what Travis was doing mostly.
Sure.
But
Mhm.
showcasing it in such a way on TikTok, on social media, that is just creating an understanding and acceptance that extreme vocals are an actual form of vocals that is worthwhile, that is credible, and is something that young kids are going to want to explore and experiment with. So just as drumming and guitar are playing over the next 20
Mm.
years, they're going to push the limits to the point where it's just going to explode and keep going faster and more intense. I believe the same thing is coming with extreme vocals. There will be more and more weird sounds, strange techniques maybe, or like using the techniques that already exist to create even more interesting alien-esque
Sure.
sounds, hypothetically. More Gudalax vocals, maybe the weird frog pig inhale vocals.
Goodalax.
I love Martin. He's awesome. Yeah.
Yo, yeah. Well, I love that take, and it's kind of interesting to me, because in like the fandom, you often find people who, they're like, oh, these new deathcore kid vocalists, and then you have these people who are
I
like,
sort of sit with that. I like it. I find it extremely impressive. But to sit through a whole song just to wait for the breakdown where they make animal noises is not for me. And I'm sorry to all your fans that are gonna be like,
no,
"Fuck this
no,
guy."
no. See, to me, that's a very measured take, and I find, I've talked with Sven from Aborted, and
Oh, I love him. Yeah.
very great guy. I had him on the channel, and
Oh, I love
briefly
him.
one time talked with Eddie,
Yeah.
and it's interesting that a lot of the vocalists who have been doing this for a long time, it may not necessarily be to their taste, but they find it fascinating and have respect for it. The people actually like on stage, like touring, doing this for so long, but in the fandom, people are like, and I'm like,
Oh, no,
no,
no. I see the technique. I see the talent.
yeah,
The one take performances, if those are truly one take performances, are very impressive. It's these kids come out to play. It's just it's the new thing. It's like
hmm,
10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, drummers would know this more than I would. Everyone started doing the swivel technique, and all of a sudden,
oh yeah,
bass drums just got fucking insane, where it was
yeah,
just next level fast and so easy. And it's all this same type of build of person that comes out and pulls out the swivel technique super easily. It tends to be people with really skinny legs. It's
I
true.
never,
It's true.
I
Think
never
about
thought
it.
about that, but
It's true. Now my drummer noticed it, so it's people that just have this physical benefits that work towards new techniques. So I guess that's something that's going to come up in the future for screaming too. What that's going to be, I don't know. But
I
I
don't know
do find
either.
it very impressive what Will does, what David does from Signs of the Swarm. Um, It's interesting, it's animalistic, it's definitely brutal. That's for sure.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Mental cruelty is another one. Very, very
Oh yeah.
that kid's
Lucas is great.
he's
He's great.
really good. Yeah.
He's excellent. Well, yeah, I like that take. I hate to sound like, the interviewer who was like, I agree with that, but I do agree with that. I do agree with that.
That's
And
interesting.
that, yeah. But I think, and fans of the channel know this about me as well. But like on my own, I don't listen to deathcore as much. I'm at my core, I'm a black metal guy, always have been,
Oh,
always
cool.
will be. But at the same time, like I do love
Now, there's
digging.
extreme vocals, the black metal vocals, where they scream and they don't care.
Yeah,
And
it's
and they
one of the bad horrid Helligusfart, one of my favorite like 1993, 1994 something. But
just swallowing razors and screaming for no reason.
yeah, just I'm not gonna do it because it sounds spooky.
No.
But I think that this for my audience, because like I told you, it's a lot of younger like deathcore people. This is probably going to be a lot of my audience's first exposure to Cryptopsy, and for those
cool.
who listen to this and they're like, hey, this is fucking awesome. Well, you mentioned your podcast. I'll delete this if you haven't said any this part, but you mentioned now that it's Dunzo, right? Like
It's on hiatus starting today. I dropped my 500th episode today, and the band is so busy, life is so busy that I need to focus on other things right now. So I love everything that I've done with Vox and Hops. Vox and Hops is my podcast. It started in
yes, yeah.
2018. It started as a way to keep me busy
Hmm.
because that same year, Chris's studio is always running amazingly. Ollie joined Cattle. And Flo told me that the singer of his new project with Rune was David Vincent from Morbid Angel. And
Hmm.
I was like, holy, I got to find something for myself because I'm going to be jealous of my bros and I don't want
No,
that.
yeah, no
So I
lie.
started a
Wow.
podcast. I started a podcast and it gave me a bunch of skills. I interviewed all of my favorite musicians basically, except for Mike Patton and Maynard from Tool.
Mm,
I've had the chance to share beers with a bunch of people. I've created a bunch of beers. I love everything that I've done with the podcast. But it's been about a year that it's been nagging in the back of my mind that I need to focus on other things. Many things, brand Vox and Hops, are going to continue. Beer collabs, events, me hosting stuff, the reviews. I'm not sure I said
sure.
that. But I got to take it easy on the interviews. Plus, I've been doing 100 interviews for the record that drops next week.
Woo! Well, that is well, good for you. Good for you for doing that. So, I fully support it. So yeah, for anybody, what should they be looking out for? It's interesting. You said, oh, he mispronounced the name of the album, and now I'm like, don't do it. And I can't. It's an insatiable. See, now I'm spacing on
Oh,
it
yo,
because
you
I'm
got it.
I'm
You got it. You
nervous.
got it.
I'm
That's the
nervous
hard
about
one.
getting
That's
wrong.
the hard one.
What is it again? I'm just gonna
An
ask him. 'Cause
Insatiable Violence comes out on June 20th, Seasons of Mist. It is an album that we're proud of. It is a continuation of As Gomorrah Burns, our Juno award-winning record from last year. We won that Juno, which is basically a Canadian Grammy for the best metal record, rock record too. And it's coming. We're very proud of it. It's extreme, it's groovy, it's got some melody to it, it's got some weird sections. We wrote it while on tour, which is something we've never done before.
Whoa.
Just pushing ourselves to be as relevant as we can while honoring the legacy of Cryptopsy.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, I'm excited for it. I hope that this has brought a lot of new younger people into the Cryptopsy fold. And thank you so much for being on the channel. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Now, Mark, you roll. Thank you. Can't wait to meet face to face one day.
Hell yeah. Awesome. All right. And as I always say, many thanks, much love. I'm out.